If you're hearing this, then I ignored every warning I was given. I didn't plan to upload tonight. I didn't even plan to record. I just couldn't sleep, and the rain wouldn't stop, and the silence in my apartment felt louder than anything I could put headphones on to drown out. So I pressed record, the same way people open a window when they smell smoke and hope it's nothing serious. It's past midnight now. That part matters more than you probably think. The clock on my wall clicked over an hour ago, and I remember noticing it because the sound felt wrong, like it echoed when it shouldn't have. Maybe you're listening to this during the day, or maybe you've got rain playing in the background because it helps you relax. That's how this usually starts. That's how I always started. A familiar voice, a dark room, rain against the glass, something unsettling but contained. This recording wasn't edited. There are no cuts, no music cues, no safety rails. If something slips through, I won't catch it. And if you're listening closely, you might hear things I didn't notice at the time. That's one of the reasons I was told not to upload anymore. Not because the stories were disturbing, but because listening changes things. It sharpens certain edges. It tunes you in. I know how dramatic that sounds. I can hear myself talking, and part of me wants to laugh it off, make some cynical joke about horror narrators losing the plot. I wish that was all this was. But some recordings don't end when the audio stops. Some of them linger. They settle into the spaces where sound usually fades, and they wait for the next time it rains. You didn't stumble onto this by accident. I don't believe in that anymore. People say the algorithm brought them here, or autoplay, or insomnia. That's just the surface explanation. If you're hearing this, then something lined up just right. The timing, the weather, the quiet. Listening is participation, whether you meant it to be or not. I've been doing this long enough to recognize patterns. At first it was just stories, things people sent me, posts scraped from forums, accounts that felt a little too detailed to be fictional. Then I started noticing comments that referenced things I hadn't said out loud yet. Messages asking if it was raining where I lived. Emails warning me not to read certain submissions during storms. I told myself it was coincidence. Audience engagement. Creepy fun. Things changed after the third upload last winter. I didn't notice right away. It was small stuff. My recordings picking up sounds I didn't remember making. The rain outside syncing perfectly with my breathing, like it was listening for cues. A comment that appeared before the video finished processing, asking me if I'd heard it too. I should have stopped then. That's what everyone says when they hear the story later. That's what you're probably thinking right now. But stopping feels different when you're in it. Stopping feels like admitting you've already gone too far. And maybe I had. There's another reason I'm saying all this out loud now. Confession changes the shape of things. Silence keeps them contained, but naming them gives them edges. I was warned about that too, in a message that disappeared before I could screenshot it. It said that once enough people heard the same thing described the same way, it stopped being hypothetical. It became a place, or a habit, or a door people didn't realize they were standing in front of. I've started to wonder if that's why rain matters so much. It's constant, but no two storms sound the same. It fills gaps. It blurs edges. It gives cover. When everything is wet and loud, it's easier for other sounds to hide in plain hearing. Easier for patterns to practice without being noticed. Easier for someone like me to tell myself nothing is wrong, because everything still sounds normal enough. Normal enough is how most dangerous things survive, by blending into routines, playlists, nightly habits, and voices you trust enough to let them keep talking after midnight like this. Tonight wasn't supposed to exist. These stories weren't meant to be compiled, not like this. There are rules about repetition, about acknowledgement, about letting patterns complete themselves. I learned those rules too late, and I broke most of them by accident. Or maybe I was nudged. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. The rain's heavier now. You might not hear it clearly through your speakers, but I can feel it in the walls. That's another thing no one tells you. Sound doesn't just travel through air. It moves through structures, through habits, through people who stay up too late listening to things they know they shouldn't. If any of this feels familiar, I want you to pay attention to that feeling. Don't dismiss it. Don't scroll away from it. Familiarity is how this starts. Recognition is the door. I'm not asking you to turn this off. If you were going to, you already would have. I just need you to understand that by staying, you're doing more than listening to a story. You're helping it finish. Give me a second. I need to steady my voice before I continue. The first story is the one I wish I'd stopped recording. Nothing bad happened until I tried to explain it. That's the part people always misunderstand when I tell this story. They expect slammed doors or blood in the sink or something cinematic enough to justify fear. But the house never did anything dramatic. It just sounded normal. Perfectly, relentlessly normal. And that was the problem. I moved in during late October, right as the rain started settling into its seasonal routine. It was a small rental on the edge of town, the kind of place landlords describe as quiet because it's cheaper than saying isolated. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, thin walls, old plumbing. The listing photos were aggressively neutral. Beige carpet, white walls, nothing that suggested history. I liked that. At the time, I thought blankness meant safety. The first night, the rain started around dusk and didn't let up. It tapped against the roof and slid down the gutters in uneven rhythms. I remember standing in the living room with boxes still unpacked, listening to it and feeling oddly relieved. Rain fills space. It gives sound somewhere to go. Silence can't build up pressure when everything is already occupied. The house made noises, but I expected that. Old pipes clicked and knocked whenever I ran the shower. The floorboards creaked under my weight, especially near the hallway. Sometimes I heard thumps from the unit next door, muted enough to feel distant but present. All of it was explainable. I told myself that over and over. I said it out loud once, just to hear it sound real. By the third night, I started noticing the timing. It wasn't obvious at first, just a vague sense that certain sounds preferred certain moments. The footsteps upstairs, because that's what I assumed they were, only happened when the rain was heavy. Never during a lull, never during silence. They always landed between raindrops, as if they were careful not to interrupt. I laughed about it on the phone with my sister. I told her the house had dramatic timing. She asked if I was sleeping okay. I said yes, which was technically true. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, like the house was doing the listening for me. A week in, I met the landlord when he came by to fix a leaky faucet. He was older than I expected, with hands that looked permanently stained by rust and oil. He moved through the house confidently, like someone who knew where every sound came from. "Pipes will knock when it rains," he said, crouched under the sink. "Pressure changes. Nothing to worry about." I told him I'd noticed footsteps sometimes. I try to keep my tone light, casual, like a joke you make to see how someone reacts. He didn't look up. "Old framing," he said. "Wood expands. Contracts. Sounds like walking if you don't know better." "Even upstairs?" I asked. He paused just long enough for me to register it. Then the wrench turned again. "There's no upstairs." That should have been enough. That should have been the moment I packed my things back into boxes and left. Instead, I nodded and told myself I'd misspoken. I do that a lot. I correct my own memories before anyone else has to. The whispers started after that, soft enough that I couldn't pin them down. They rode the wind when the rain picked up, threaded through the sound like static. Every time I tried to focus on them, they dissolved into noise. I told myself it was wind slipping through poorly sealed windows. I told myself the house was settling. I told myself whatever explanation arrived first. One night, while lying in bed, I heard my name. Just once. Clear enough to make my chest tighten. It came right after a thunderclap, perfectly timed, like punctuation. I sat up, heart pounding, and waited. The rain kept falling. The house kept breathing around me. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I apologized to the empty room. I don't know why I did that. It felt instinctive, like smoothing over an awkward moment. The house responded with a long, low creak that rippled through the walls. It sounded satisfied. I stopped acknowledging it after that. I kept my headphones on. I left the TV playing at low volume when I slept. I filled the space with sound that belonged to me. Things stayed manageable as long as I didn't draw attention to patterns. Silence, I learned, was safety. The neighbor next door caught me outside one evening while the rain came down in sheets. She was standing under the overhang, smoking, watching the water pool at her feet. "You hear it too, don't you?" she asked, not looking at me. "Hear what?" I said, already knowing. She exhaled slowly, the way it walks when it rains. I didn't answer. Neither did she. After a moment, she flicked her cigarette into the puddle and went back inside. We never spoke about it again. The night everything changed. The power went out during a storm. No TV, no fan, no artificial noise to blur the edges. The house filled the silence immediately, eager and loud. Footsteps paced the hallway in time with the rain. Whispers threaded themselves between thunderclaps. It felt closer than it ever had before. I don't know what possessed me to speak. Maybe I thought naming it would take away its power. Maybe I was tired of pretending not to notice. I stood in the living room, rain pounding the roof, and said, "I hear you." The house went still, completely, impossibly silent. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. Then the footsteps resumed, slower now, heavier. They stopped just outside the doorway. The whispers grew clearer, overlapping, urgent. Not words exactly, but intent. Attention. That was the first time I realized something was listening. I didn't connect it to the house at first. That's important. I want you to understand that I wasn't looking for patterns yet. I still believed each story could exist on its own, sealed off from the others. That belief made it easier to walk home every night without questioning why my shoulders stayed tense long after I reached my door. I worked late back then, closing shifts that ended just before midnight. The route home was familiar enough that I could have walked it with my eyes closed. 3 blocks past the convenience store, one long stretch beside the park, then the row of apartments where my lights waited. It was safe, predictable. Even when it rained, there were always cars passing, people hurrying along under umbrellas, the city breathing around me. The rain that season was constant, not dramatic storms, just steady, soaking downpours that blurred reflections and filled the streets with sound. I liked it at first. Rain gives you anonymity. It makes everyone look the same, heads down, moving with purpose. No one stands out when everything is wet and loud. The footsteps started as an absence more than a presence, a gap where something should have been. I noticed it the first night I walked alone in the rain, without music playing. My phone battery was dead, so all I had was the sound of water hitting pavement and my own shoes slapping against concrete. After a few minutes, I realized there was another rhythm layered into the noise. Not ahead of me, not behind me, beside me. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I waited, heart thudding, rain sliding down my collar. A couple passed me on the opposite side of the street, laughing, oblivious. The city didn't care. After a moment, I started walking again. The footsteps returned immediately, matching my pace perfectly. Left foot, right foot, splash, splash. It stayed close enough that I should have been able to see it in my peripheral vision, but there was nothing there. I told myself it was echo. Acoustics do strange things in the rain. Sound bounces, overlaps, fills gaps. That explanation worked for a few nights. I kept my pace steady, pretended not to notice when the rhythm adjusted if I slowed down or sped up. I didn't look. Looking felt like an escalation. By the 4th night, I tried stopping abruptly mid-step. The footsteps stopped with me. No delay, no extra splash. Just silence layered under rain. That was the night I broke my own rule and acknowledged it. Not out loud, just internally. Just the thought, someone is walking with me. The presence felt closer after that. Not physically closer, but clearer, more intentional. It didn't crowd me. It didn't rush ahead. It stayed exactly where it had been, as if it had found the correct distance and locked it in. I started recording my walks without really deciding to. I'd pull my phone out, pretend to check a message, and let the voice recorder run. It felt safer to collect evidence than to rely on memory. Memory can be negotiated with. Recordings feel honest. The files were boring at first. Just rain, traffic, my breathing. No extra footsteps, no voices. That reassured me more than it should have. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I told myself anxiety fills and blanks the same way rain does. Then one night, someone spoke to me. "Hey," a voice said from just ahead of my left shoulder. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped my phone. A man stood under a broken streetlight, rain pouring off the brim of his hood. I hadn't seen him approach. I hadn't heard his footsteps diverge from the rhythm beside mine. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine," I lied, pulse racing. "I didn't see you." "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "That happens." We walked together for half a block. He kept pace easily, like he'd always been there. The rain seemed quieter around him, muffled, as if it avoided his space. I noticed then that his shoes didn't splash. "Bad night to be out," I said, grasping for normal conversation. "Depends," he replied. "Some things only come out when it rains." I laughed nervously. "Like what?" He looked at me then, really looked, and his smile widened. "Practice." We reached the corner where I usually turned toward my apartment. I stopped. He didn't. "You going this way?" he asked. "No," I said. "I live there." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "Be careful," he said. "You don't always hear everything the first time." When I turned back, he was gone. No retreating footsteps. No fading silhouette. Just rain and the hum of distant traffic. I checked the recordings later. I shouldn't have. The audio picked up my breathing, uneven and sharp. The rain was louder than I remembered, almost overwhelming. And underneath it, steady and close, was breathing that wasn't mine. Calm, curious. It synced to my steps the way the footsteps had. In one place, right after the man spoke, the breathing leaned closer to the microphone, close enough that it distorted. I deleted the files. Then I restored them. Then I listened again, convincing myself I'd hear something different this time. That's how it hooks you. Not with fear, but with the promise of clarity. The next night, the footsteps returned earlier, like it was eager. They stayed with me through crowded streets, through intersections filled with people. No one else reacted. No one looked twice. Whatever walked with me wasn't interested in them. I stopped recording after that, but it didn't matter. I could feel it listening anyway, matching my pace, memorizing my stride. The rain felt heavier, more deliberate, like cover. It wasn't following me. It was practicing. I didn't notice the comments at first. That sounds impossible, I know. But when you upload something unsettling, you learn to skim. People like to exaggerate. They like to scare themselves. They like to feel included. I told myself that was all it was. Listeners projecting their own fears onto familiar sounds. Rain, silence, footsteps, easy ingredients, easy reactions. Then the messages started arriving in ways that didn't fit the usual rhythm. The first one came less than a minute after the upload finished processing. No username I recognized. No profile picture. Just text. They asked if it had been raining where I lived when I recorded. That alone wouldn't have bothered me. Except I hadn't mentioned the weather yet. Not in the description. Not in the title. Not in the audio until nearly halfway through. I replied with a joke and moved on. More messages followed. Comments buried deep in threads. Replies to replies. Always phrased like offhand observations. Someone mentioned the timing of the thunder matching their own local storm. Someone else said they paused the video because they thought they heard footsteps in their hallway, only to realize the sound was still playing after they took their headphones off. A few people asked if the recordings were supposed to react when acknowledged. That last one stayed with me. At first, it felt validating. There's a strange comfort in shared unease. It makes the fear feel social instead of isolating. People swapped theories. They compared timestamps. They joked about cursed audio and haunted rain playlists. A few even thanked me for articulating something they'd experienced, but never named. I told myself this was what community looked like in the dark corners of the internet. Collective shivers, mutual curiosity. Then someone posted a comment that simply read, "Please stop compiling them." No explanation, no emojis, no follow-up. Just that sentence, sitting there like a boundary I hadn't known I was crossing. I deleted it, not out of anger, out of reflex. It felt like spam. like fear-mongering. When I refreshed the page, it was back. Same wording, same punctuation, same timestamp, as if it had never been touched. That was the first time I felt the shift. The moment when validation tipped into something heavier. Dread has weight to it. You can feel it settle. The direct messages got more specific after that. People described experiences that matched details I hadn't shared publicly. Sound aligning to storms. Spaces reacting when acknowledged. The sense of being listened to rather than followed. One person sent a floor plan of their apartment with a room circled in red that didn't exist on the official blueprint. Another attached an audio file recorded during a downpour, asking if the breathing underneath the rain sounded familiar. I stopped opening attachments after that. I learned very quickly that some things don't need to be confirmed to be understood. The warning came through email, not a platform message. No subject line, no signature, just a block of text that read like it had been written by someone exhausted rather than frightened. They said they'd been tracking similar stories for years, long before me. That patterns formed when accounts were repeated too closely together. That acknowledgement accelerated things. That compiling them in one place created continuity, and continuity was dangerous. They asked me to take the videos down. They didn't threaten me. They didn't tell me what would happen if I refused. They just said the pattern was nearly complete, and that I was standing too close to see it. I replied asking what the pattern was. The email bounced back undelivered. After that, the comments changed tone. Less joking, more quiet agreement. People stopped asking if the stories were real and started asking what they should do when it rained. Some shared rules they'd made for themselves. Never listen after midnight. Never acknowledge unfamiliar sounds. Never replay recordings captured during storms. None of the rules matched perfectly, but the overlaps were unsettling. I noticed something else too. Certain comments only appeared during heavy rain. They'd be there when I checked, then gone the next morning. Like condensation evaporating. I started screenshotting them, but the images blurred when I tried to zoom in, text warping into shapes that didn't resolve into letters. The sense of community didn't disappear. It curdled. Supportive messages sat beside warnings. Validation shared space with fear. People encouraged each other to stay silent, to stop recording, to let things fade. Others begged me to keep going, to finish what I'd started, to explain the parts they couldn't articulate themselves. That's the trap of patterns. Once you see one, you start seeing intention everywhere. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if the warnings were genuine or part of the same momentum pushing me forward. All I knew was that silence felt heavier than recording, and stopping felt like leaving something unfinished in a way that made my skin itch. I reread the email one last time before it vanished from my inbox. Nearly complete. The phrase stuck. Completion implies purpose. Direction. It implies someone benefits from the ending. The rain started again outside, slow and steady, like it was listening for a decision. The next story broke every rule they warned me about. It already knew who I was. That was the first thought I had when I saw the door, and it arrived fully formed, without panic, without surprise, like a memory surfacing instead of a realization. The hallway was dim, lit by flickering emergency bulbs that always struggled during storms. Rain hammered the windows at the far end of the corridor, blurring the city into a gray smear. Everything looked the way it always did, except for the door that hadn't been there before. I know my building. I've walked those halls half asleep, distracted, carrying groceries, counting steps without meaning to. The stretch of wall where the door stood had always been blank, painted the same off-white as the rest, scuffed near the baseboards where carts scraped past. Now there was a doorframe, narrow and slightly crooked, like it had been installed by someone guessing at measurements. The door itself was dark wood, swollen slightly at the edges as if it had absorbed too much moisture. The rain was loud enough that night to feel physical. I could feel it in my chest and the soles of my feet. The sound filled the building, threaded through vents and pipes. I told myself the storm was making me notice things differently. That shadows stretch when you're tired. That the human brain fills gaps when it expects continuity. I reached out and touched the handle. It was warm. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt intimate, like shaking a hand that already knew your grip. I pulled my fingers back quickly, glancing around the hallway to make sure no one was watching. The building was quiet, too quiet for the amount of rain outside. I didn't open the door right away. I went back to my apartment, heart racing, and pulled out the floor plan from my lease agreement. I'd kept it folded in a drawer with other paperwork I never thought I'd need. The diagram was simple. Rectangles, measurements, doors clearly marked. There was no extra room, no deviation, no place where a door like that could exist. I stared at the paper until the rain blurred into background noise. I even checked an old email where the manager had sent the same file as a PDF. Identical, clean, logical. When I stepped back into the hallway, the door was still there. It was raining harder now. Water rattled against the windows like thrown gravel. I noticed then that the light above the door flickered in a different rhythm than the others, dimming slightly whenever thunder rolled. The handle gleamed, catching light in a way that made it hard to look away. I don't remember deciding to open it. I remember the sensation of my hand closing around the handle again, warmer this time, almost pulsing. The door swung inward without resistance, revealing a room that was both too large and too small at the same time. The air inside smelled like dust and rain and something faintly familiar, like old books or clothing pulled from storage. The room was furnished, not extravagantly, just enough to feel lived in. A narrow bed against one wall, a desk cluttered with papers, a lamp casting a soft yellow glow. Everything looked ordinary until I recognized the objects. The jacket hanging on the back of the chair was mine. Or rather, it was a jacket I'd owned years ago, one I'd donated after it tore at the seam. The mug on the desk had a crack I remembered noticing one morning before throwing it away. These weren't copies. They were mine. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Mine in the way only handled objects can be, worn into familiarity by specific habits. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a soft click that sounded final. The rain dulled immediately, reduced to a distant murmur, like it was happening in another building. The room felt insulated from time. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, expecting messages, warnings, something urgent. No signal, no time displayed, just a black screen reflecting my own expression back at me, distorted by the low light. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, hours. It felt like waiting for something to start, like the room was holding its breath. I noticed details slowly, notes on the desk written in my handwriting, referencing events that hadn't happened yet, dates circled that lay weeks in the future, a list of rules taped to the wall, some crossed out, others underlined twice. One of them read, "Do not acknowledge the room out loud." I broke that rule immediately. "Why is this here?" I asked, voice trembling slightly. The lamp flickered. The air felt heavier, like pressure building. Somewhere behind the walls, I heard movement, slow and deliberate. Not footsteps exactly, more like shifting weight. I stumbled back into the hallway, heart hammering, and yanked the door open. The corridor looked normal again. Blank wall, no frame, no handle, just scuffed paint and dim light. The rain roared back into focus, overwhelming in its suddenness. I laughed, breathless, hysterical. I told myself it was stress, hallucination, a trick of exhaustion layered over months of listening too closely to other people's fears. I called the building manager the next morning. "There's something wrong with the floor plan," I said, trying to sound calm. "I think there's a room missing." He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "There are no missing rooms." "I saw it," I insisted. "Last night, during the storm." "There are no extra doors," he repeated. "I've managed that building for 15 years." "Then how do you explain the furniture?" I asked. "My things." Silence stretched. In the background, I could hear rain hitting his end of the line too. "You shouldn't be looking for it," he said finally, voice low. "Some spaces only exist under certain conditions." The call dropped before I could respond. The door appeared 3 more times that month, always during heavy rain, always in places it didn't belong. once in the stairwell, once at the end of a maintenance corridor I'd never seen before. Each time, the room inside changed slightly. New objects, different notes, evidence of time passing that didn't align with my own. I started to recognize the pattern. The room wasn't random. It wasn't appearing for the first time. It was accumulating versions of itself, layering moments, collecting evidence of me. Each visit felt more familiar, more intimate, like returning somewhere I'd already lived. The last time I found it, the list of rules on the wall had grown longer. At the bottom, in fresh ink, was a new line. Do not share this room. I stood there, rain muted, air thick, understanding settling into my bones. That's when I realized the rooms were accumulating. We all heard it. That was the worst part, not the sound itself, but the certainty that it wasn't mine alone. If I'd been the only one, I could have explained it away, wrapped it in stress or coincidence. But this was shared, collective. It moved through us like weather, unavoidable and impersonal, and yet everyone pretended it wasn't happening. I was working nights then, in an office complex stitched awkwardly onto the side of a residential building. Shared elevators, shared parking garage, shared storms. Rain pooled on the concrete outside the glass lobby doors, the sound echoing up through the atrium like something alive and restless. During heavy storms, the building amplified everything. Vents moaned, pipes clicked, walls ticked with thermal stress. Management sent out emails reassuring us that all of it was normal. The sound wasn't. It started as a low vibration, felt more than heard, a rhythmic pressure, like someone testing a wall with the flat of their hand. Always during rain, always after midnight. It threaded through the floor and up into your legs, settling there patient. At first, people shifted in their chairs, glanced around, frowned. Then the noise would deepen, stretching into something almost vocal, a drawn-out resonance that made conversation falter. No one ever said anything. The first time I brought it up was in the break room. Rain lashed the windows hard enough to blur the city lights into streaks. The vending machine hummed, fighting the silence. "Do you hear that?" I asked casually, stirring my coffee. 3 co-workers froze. One of them smiled too quickly. "Hear what?" "That sound," I said. It swelled right on cue, a slow, deliberate pulse that crawled under my skin. "Oh," another said, staring into her mug. "The pipes." I nodded, even though it didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like something keeping time. After that, I stopped asking, but I watched. Every storm, the same thing happened. People flinched. Someone would pause mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, listening. Fingers tightened around pens. The moment passed, and the performance resumed. Laughter, emails, normalcy reasserted like a rule being obeyed. Downstairs, in the residential section, it was worse. I lived there too, in a one-bedroom that vibrated faintly whenever the rain came down hard enough. Neighbors avoided each other in the hallways on stormy nights. Doors closed more quietly. No one lingered. The sound traveled through walls, through floors, unified by the building's bones. I started recording it. Just audio at first, my phone resting on the table as rain hammered the windows. The playback never sounded the same. Sometimes it was barely audible, a suggestion more than a sound. Other times it came through clearly, layered beneath the rain, like breathing slowed to an unnatural cadence. I played it for a co-worker once. Just one. His name was Aaron. He was the kind of person who joked during fire drills, who didn't buy into office superstition, who stood by the copy machine while thunder rolled outside. "Listen," I said, holding out my phone. He leaned in, brow furrowing. The sound swelled, unmistakable even through cheap speakers. His smile faded. "That's not pipes," he said quietly. The machine whirred to life, startling both of us. He straightened, glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Don't do that again." "Do what?" "Play it. Talk about it. Whatever this is." He swallowed. "People don't like it." That night, during the storm, I heard him break. We were alone in the break room, rain roaring outside like static turned up too high. The sound had grown louder than usual, pressing against the walls, vibrating the table. Aaron paced, running a hand through his hair. "Everyone hears it," he said suddenly. "They have to." I didn't answer. The air felt charged, like something was waiting for him to finish. "I asked Marcy once," he continued, voice shaking. "She told me I was imagining it, but she was shaking. She hears it. They all do." Thunder cracked, close enough to rattle the ceiling tiles. The sound beneath it swelled, resonant, almost pleased. "Why won't they say anything?" he whispered. Before I could answer, someone laughed down the hall. A door opened. Footsteps approached. Aaron's expression changed instantly, mask snapping back into place. He turned away, conversation over. The next day, his desk was empty. HR said he'd taken leave. Management said he'd transferred. No forwarding email. No goodbye message. His access badge stopped working. I checked the parking garage cameras out of morbid curiosity. His car was gone. During the next storm, the sound changed. It was sharper now, more defined, like a signal strengthened by acknowledgement. In the hallway, I heard someone sobbing softly behind a closed door. When I knocked, the sobbing stopped. No answer. I tried the building manager again. The line crackled with rain on his end. "You know what it is," I said. "I know what it does," he replied. "Not what it is." "Why doesn't anyone talk about it?" "Because silence works," he said. "Mostly." The storms grew more frequent, louder. The sound threaded through meetings, through sleep, through everything. I started noticing rules enforced without words. People who flinched too obviously avoided eye contact later. Someone who lingered listening too long found their keycard deactivated the next day. Conversations cut short whenever thunder rolled. One night, during a particularly violent storm, the sound swelled into something undeniable. It resonated through the building like a voice trying to find language. In the break room, half a dozen of us stood frozen, rain pounding the windows, the air vibrating with it. A woman I barely knew started crying. "Please," she whispered, to no one in particular. The sound deepened. No one moved to comfort her. No one acknowledged the noise. We stared at the floor, at our phones, anywhere but at each other. The woman's sobs quieted, replaced by shallow breaths. Eventually, the storm passed. The sound receded. She didn't come in the next day. That's when I understood. Silence wasn't fear. It was enforcement. I didn't start calling them rules because I wanted order. I started because my brain needed the illusion of it. Lists feel safer than chaos. If you name a thing, write it down, number it. You can pretend you're ahead of it. You can pretend you're learning instead of being conditioned. That was my first mistake. The rules weren't given to me. They emerged, slowly, in fragments, in comments written at 3 in the morning by people who deleted their accounts an hour later, in DMs that began with, "I thought I was the only one," and ended with, "Please don't reply to this." They didn't line up neatly. Sometimes they contradicted each other. Sometimes they changed after I followed them too closely. Still, I wrote them down. Rule 1 was the easiest, and the one everyone seemed to agree on. Don't acknowledge the sound out loud. Not during rain. Not during storms. Not even as a joke. Especially not as a joke. People who laughed it off in comments always stopped commenting first. I noticed that early. Humor was fine. Recognition wasn't. Saying, "That reminds me of something," was acceptable. Saying, "I hear it too," crossed a line. Rule 2 followed quickly after. Recordings are worse than memories. Whatever this is, it tolerates forgetting. It even seems to encourage it. Time blurs details. Fear softens. But recordings don't forget. Audio doesn't reinterpret. Video doesn't blink at the wrong moment. Several people told me the same thing independently. They were fine until they replayed it. Until they heard something they hadn't noticed before. Until the sound changed because it knew it was being studied. Rule 3 is the one I don't understand yet. Everyone describes it differently. Some say rain is a requirement. Others insist it's just camouflage. One person swore nothing happened until they talked about it during clear weather, like the thing needed contrast to sharpen itself. Another said storms weren't the trigger, only the excuse. I've tried mapping incidents to rainfall totals, to thunder timing, to barometric pressure. Patterns appear, then dissolve. It's like the rule resents being pinned down. Rule 4 came from someone who begged me to stop keeping score. Don't compare experiences too closely. Similarities attract attention. When too many details line up, same sounds, same timing, same phrasing, it's like drawing a shape that wants to be completed. That was the first time someone used that word with me. Completed. They said it like a threat and a relief at the same time. Rule 5 is more of a suggestion, but it's the one I break the most. Stop reading after midnight. Something about that hour makes everything softer. Boundaries blur. People confess more than they intend to. I've noticed that's when the longest messages come in. That's when people stop hedging and start telling the truth. It's also when the stories start to resemble each other too closely for comfort. There are smaller rules too. Don't listen with headphones during a storm. Don't fall asleep with the audio still playing. Don't narrate your own experience while it's happening. Don't point out patterns unless someone else does first. Don't ask follow-up questions you don't want answered. Don't assume silence means safety. I joke about it sometimes, because if I don't, the weight of it settles too deep. I tell myself it's like dealing with bad neighbors or outdated wiring. Learn the quirks. Work around them. Pretend it's manageable. Dark humor slips naturally when resignation does. You either laugh, or you start measuring how much rain it would take to justify leaving everything behind. But here's the part no rule prepares you for. They don't stay still. Something that was safe last month isn't safe now. A phrase that meant nothing suddenly carries weight. A detail you've repeated a dozen times becomes dangerous on the 13th. People who followed every rule still disappeared. People who broke them recklessly sometimes walked away untouched. It's not fairness. It's calibration. That's why I stopped promising anyone safety. That's why I stopped saying, "You'll be fine if you just," because I don't know. None of us do. Anyone who claims certainty is either lying or already too far inside it to notice the walls closing. If you've broken any of these rules, you probably felt it. That moment of pressure. The sense that something shifted slightly to accommodate your attention. Maybe you dismissed it. Most people do. That's another unspoken rule. Denial works until it doesn't. I keep thinking about the warnings I ignored. The messages asking me to stop compiling, stop comparing, stop narrating. They weren't afraid of the stories themselves. They were afraid of accumulation, of momentum, of the way putting these things side by side creates something larger than the sum of its parts. That's the real pattern. Not rain, not sound, not silence. Connection. Every time someone recognizes themselves in one of these stories, the shape sharpens. Every time you think, "That happened to me too," something aligns. I don't know what happens when it finishes aligning. No one who hinted at that stuck around long enough to explain. Which brings me to this. The last story is the one I was told never to share. I used to think I was documenting this because I was scared, that I was recording, compiling, organizing these stories because fear needed somewhere to go. A container. A vault. That's the word I kept coming back to. A place to lock things away so they couldn't leak into the rest of my life. I told myself that was what this channel was. A controlled release. Entertainment. Catharsis. That was another lie I didn't realize I was telling myself. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, the way everything else did. A comment that thanked me for keeping it alive. A message that said the rain felt louder after listening. A timestamp someone pointed out that matched the exact moment thunder hit outside my own window while I was recording. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they formed a shape I recognized too late. I wasn't a victim. I was a collector. Every story I shared wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Every time I framed something as true, as experienced, as confessional, it gained weight. Reality bends toward attention. I should have known that. I'd said it myself in different words dozens of times. Acknowledgement accelerates things. Recognition sharpens edges. Recording preserves what should decay. The vault doesn't keep things out. It keeps them intact. The rain was the key. I see that now. Not because it causes anything, but because it carries things. It smooths transitions. It fills silence so other sounds can hide inside it. It's white noise with memory. When people listen during storms, their environments sink just enough for something to pass through unnoticed. Not physically, conceptually. Like a tune you can't unhear once you've learned it. That's why it spreads. You don't need to experience it directly. You just need to listen long enough for your brain to complete the pattern on its own. The stories do the rest. They provide scaffolding, context, permission. Once the shape exists in your head, the rain knows where to go. I figured this out the night I finally listened back to everything in order. Not as a creator, not as a narrator, as a listener. Headphones on, lights off, rain hitting the glass like fingers testing for weak spots. I told myself it was research. I told myself I needed closure. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Almost. But the screen lit up with a voicemail notification, and something about the timing made my chest tighten. The message was from a blocked number. No name. No transcription preview. Just audio. I waited until the thunder passed before pressing play. The voice was tired. Older than I expected. Not panicked. Not pleading. Resigned. In the way people sound when they've already lost but still feel obligated to explain the rules to someone standing where they used to stand. They said my name, not my channel name. Mine. They told me they tried to catalog it too. Years ago. Different platform. Different format. Same instinct. They thought if they gathered enough accounts, they could map the boundaries, define the rules, maybe even contain it. They laughed quietly at that part. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. They said the mistake wasn't the listening. It was the organizing. Stories want to be told, the voice said, but they also want to be heard together. They explained that every compilation, every theme collection, every hour-long immersion did more than entertain. It synchronized people, created shared reference points, common fears, common language. Once enough listeners recognized the same shape, the phenomenon didn't need to hide anymore. It could rely on expectation, on participation. You're not spreading awareness, they said. You're spreading access. The last thing they told me was to stop. Not uploading, not recording. Stop framing it as fiction. Stop calling it horror. Because once people believe it's only a story, they don't guard themselves. They lean in. They stay until the end. The message cut off mid-sentence. No goodbye. No warning about consequences. Just silence, heavy and unfinished. That's when I understood why the warnings escalated instead of stopping me. Why people begged me to finish. Why the pattern wanted completion. A vault is only useful if it's full. A collection only matters if it's shared. I wasn't being punished. I was being used. And so are you. If you're still listening, it's because something in you recognized the rhythm. Because the rain outside feels a little too well timed. Because part of you wanted to see how it ended. That's not an accident. That's participation. Passive listening is still listening. Entertainment is still engagement. Rituals don't require belief. Only repetition. You're already part of this. That's why you stayed until the end. I can't undo what's been compiled. I can't unalign the patterns now that they've been noticed. The vault doesn't stay closed once it's been opened. It leaks. It echoes. It waits for the next person to recognize themselves in the dark and think, for just a second, that hearing it explained might make them safer. It won't. All I can do now is record the truth of it, that this was never about me, or even about the stories themselves. It's about what happens when too many people listen at the same time and call it harmless. This wasn't supposed to be uploaded, but you're here now. It's been weeks since I pressed upload. Weeks since I promised myself that once the files were out, I could go back to normal. Sleep, work, reign without implication. But normal doesn't exist anymore, not the way it used to. The first change was subtle. My apartment, familiar in every detail, began responding differently to me. The creak of the floorboards under my weight changed tone, sharper in the corners, like it was listening for hesitation. Pipes groaned when I wasn't using water. My door locks clicked in patterns I didn't set. Small things, easily dismissed, but enough to keep me awake at night, counting the intervals. Then the comments started before I even posted a new video. Draft notifications I hadn't shared yet were accompanied by messages from accounts I didn't recognize. Some comments weren't written by people. The syntax was wrong, almost human, but skewed. Missing something. Emphasis on certain words. "You shouldn't have done that," and variations that made my stomach twist. Accounts vanished when I tried to respond. Notifications disappeared, but the impressions remained. A cold tally that refused to be ignored. Rain arrived differently too. I used to think it followed storms, low-pressure systems, clouds. Now it falls without warning. Outside my window, on the roof, on the streets. Sometimes the drizzle is warm, almost intimate. Sometimes it pounds violently, as though rehearsed for a scene that only I am witnessing. I've started tracking it, trying to predict when the phenomenon will appear. That's useless. Rain doesn't care. It just obeys the pattern. I've noticed changes in other media too. Sounds that should be mundane. The microwave, refrigerator humming, the hum of fluorescent lights, sometimes echo snippets from the recordings, distorted voices that seem to mimic syllables I spoke months ago. I hear them in the background when I replay old videos. Sometimes I pause the audio and there's nothing there. Other times, I swear something waits for acknowledgement. Nighttime is different. Some stories only appear after midnight. I've seen shadows where there shouldn't be. Shapes in the corner of my eye. Reflections in glass that don't match reality. People who used to comment on my uploads now warn me to stop or disappear entirely. And yet I can't stop. Because you, the listener, are out there too. Someone will hear this recording, and the pattern continues. There's an intimacy to this realization. I feel watched, yes, but I also feel connected. You exist in the same space as these events now, reading this, listening, participating in a way that I could never anticipate. It's a strange comfort, if comfort can be found in something that unsettles you at every turn. I've started leaving notes for myself, reminders that the world isn't as it was. Rain patterns, comet anomalies, premonitions, and the hum of appliances. Each small change reinforces what I already know. This is bigger than me. Bigger than any story I could tell alone. The vault is open. And you, if you're still here, are inside it too. So, the question isn't whether you'll hear the next story. The question is, will you notice it when it arrives? Will you recognize the shift in familiar sounds, the distortion in ordinary objects? Some of these things are subtle. Some are deliberate. And some you may never recognize until it's too late. I leave this recording here, not as a warning, not as advice, but as an acknowledgement that what began with my fear, with my insomnia, with a rainy night and a single microphone continues. Outside the window, inside your headphones, in the quiet spaces you think are safe. Next time it rains, don't check your phone. Or maybe do. Maybe that's the only way you'll understand that some stories only appear after midnight, and some will follow you home long after the audio stops. If you're still listening, then the rain hasn't driven you away yet. That matters more than you probably realize. The storm outside has softened now, not gone, just quieter, like it's learned there's no need to announce itself anymore. The drops tap gently instead of pounding, patient instead of demanding. That's how it always ends. Not with noise, but with familiarity. I don't know when this became a conversation instead of a recording. Somewhere between the first story and now, the distance collapsed. I stopped talking into a microphone and started talking to you. Not all of you, just the ones who stayed, the ones who felt the shift and didn't click away, the ones who noticed the silence between sentences stretching a little longer than it should. You might be sitting in the dark right now, or half asleep, or doing something mundane, laundry, dishes, scrolling aimlessly, letting this play in the background like harmless ambience. That's usually how it starts. That's how I started too. Horror as comfort noise. Fear with structure. A safe way to feel unsettled without consequences. I don't think it works like that anymore. Since uploading, I've tried to pretend this is just content, that I can end the recording, close the tab, and the world will reset itself. But the vault doesn't recognize endings the way we do. It understands continuity, momentum, return visits. Every replay polishes the same edges. Every binge smooths the same grooves a little deeper. I see it in comments. The ones that read like confessions instead of reactions. People saying they didn't realize something had been following the sound of rain in their apartment until they heard these stories. People asking if anyone else hears footsteps stop when they pause the video. People typing out entire experiences, then apologizing for oversharing, then deleting the comment entirely. I read those before they vanish. I always do. If you've noticed anything at all, I want you to write it down. Maybe not here, maybe not publicly, but acknowledge it somewhere safe. Silence doesn't protect you the way people think it does. It just delays recognition, and delayed recognition has a way of snapping back harder later. Still, if you choose to share, the comments are there. They always are. This space exists because you fill it. That's the part no one tells you about vaults. They're empty without contributors. I'm not asking you to be afraid. Fear burns out quickly. What lasts is awareness. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you notice patterns without needing to name them. The kind that tells you when something familiar has shifted just enough to deserve attention. If you felt that, even once, then you already understand more than most. There will be more recordings. I know that now. Not because I'm planning them, but because they tend to arrive whether I'm ready or not. Files appear where I don't remember saving them. Ideas surface fully formed, like they've been waiting their turn. Sometimes I listen back and don't remember recording certain lines at all. Other times, I remember recording them, but not meaning to. The mythology builds itself. All I do is keep the door unlocked. You don't have to listen to everything. You don't have to keep going. But you will feel it when a story belongs to you. When a title catches your eye a little too cleanly. When the rain outside syncs with the opening seconds in a way that makes coincidence feel lazy. That's how the vault calls things back. Not with force, with relevance. I've wondered if this is how it's always worked. Long before platforms and playlists. Stories passed hand to hand, mouth to ear, only finding the right people when the conditions were right. Maybe technology didn't create this. Maybe it just made it easier to archive, to replay, to stay. If you've listened to more than one of these, you're already part of the pattern. Not trapped, not doomed, just connected. Threads don't tighten unless you pull on them. Most people never notice the string around their wrist. The ones who do have a choice to ignore it or to follow it back to where it leads. I won't tell you what to choose. I will tell you this. Pay attention to how your space sounds after this ends. Not immediately. Give it time. Let the quiet settle back into place. Then notice what feels different. The absence of noise can be louder than anything you've heard so far. If nothing changes, that's fine. Truly, that means this wasn't for you. Vaults don't open for everyone. But if something does feel off, just slightly, just enough to make you replay a moment in your head, don't panic. You're not alone. You never were. That's the part people misunderstand. These stories aren't about isolation. They're about convergence. I'll leave you with this, because it's the only advice that's held up so far. Treat rain like a visitor. You don't have to invite it in. You don't have to shut it out completely. Just don't pretend it isn't there when it shows up. Denial is louder than acknowledgement ever was. Thank you for listening, for staying, for noticing. Whatever you do next, do it deliberately. Patterns feed on habit. Next time it rains, don't check your phone. And if you do, if curiosity wins, if familiarity pulls you back here, then I'll be waiting. Don't disappear. Subscribe to Midnight Vault.